Amara's bare feet slapped against cold concrete, blood drying on her palm where she gripped a small flash drive like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Behind her footsteps, unhurried, which was worse, she hit a dead end, just a wall, and beyond it, Seoul traffic she couldn't reach. Headlights swept the garage. Tires screamed against concrete. The men chasing her stopped dead where they stood. A door opened. A man stepped out, tall enough that the fluorescent light caught the top of his head before it caught his face. He didn't look at the men who'd been hunting her. He looked at the blood on her hands. "Blood is that?" Kang Tae-jun asked, his voice dangerously calm. Amara's chest heaved. She held his eyes anyway. "Not mine, but they're going to kill your sister right now unless we move." Nobody behind him moved. Nobody spoke. 6 days earlier, Amara Cole had never heard his name. If you're new here, welcome, subscribe so you don't miss how she ends up in that garage. Like this if you're already hooked. And tell me in the comments where you'd run first. 6 days before any of that, her biggest problem was a printer jamming on the 3rd floor of Hanwari Private Clinic. She'd lived in Seoul for 4 years now. Long enough that the subway map didn't scare her anymore. Long enough that she dreamed half in English and half in Korean, and caught herself apologizing to strangers in the wrong language when she bumped into them on the street. She worked nights, translating for foreign patients who came through the clinic doors scared and confused, needing someone to explain what a doctor meant when he said something gently that was actually terrifying. She liked the quiet of the night shift. The hallways emptied out. The vending machine hummed. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, the whole building seemed to exhale. She wasn't looking for anything else. Not romance, not excitement. Just a stable life, one shift at a time, one visa renewal at a time, one small apartment with a window that looked out over a noodle shop she'd never once eaten at because she was always too tired by the time she got home. The Tuesday night, the rain hadn't stopped since noon. It drummed against the clinic's windows in a way that made the fluorescent lights feel warmer than they were. Amara was closing outpatient files when the front doors opened. A young woman stumbled in, soaked through, one arm wrapped tight around her ribs. Her mascara had run halfway down her face, and she wasn't crying anymore. She looked past that, into something closer to shock. "Please," the woman said in Korean, barely above a whisper. "Please, you have to hide me." Amara's hands went still over the keyboard. "Hide you from who?" The woman, she'd later learn her name was Yoon Hae-jin, grabbed Amara's wrist. Her fingers were freezing. "There's no time," Hae-jin said. "Please." Something in her face stopped Amara from asking a third question. She'd spent 4 years learning to read fear in a language that wasn't her first, and this wasn't the fear of someone who'd tripped in the rain. This was the fear of someone being hunted, the kind that makes people's hands shake even after the danger has technically passed. Amara made her decision in under 3 seconds. She pulled Hae-jin behind the reception desk, into the supply closet where they kept extra scrubs, and shut the door just as the front entrance opened again. This time, it wasn't one frightened woman. It was 6 men, moving like they'd done this before, fanning out through the waiting room without a word. No shouting, no chaos. Just precision, which was somehow worse to watch. And behind them, filling the doorway like he'd been built specifically not to fit through it, stood a man Amara had never seen but somehow already understood. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The entire clinic went quiet around him, the way a room goes quiet before a storm hits, not from fear of thunder, but from the pressure change you feel before you hear anything at all. He wore black, tailored close enough that it was obvious the suit had been made for exactly his shoulders and nothing else. His hair was cut short and sharp, a dark fringe cutting a clean line across his forehead. His eyes moved once across the waiting room, chairs, exits, the closed supply closet door, cataloging everything in under 2 seconds. Then they landed on Amara. He walked straight to the front desk. "A woman came through here," he said. His Korean was precise, unhurried, each word placed like it cost something to waste. 10 minutes ago. Where is she?" Amara held his gaze. She didn't know yet that this was a mistake most people in Seoul knew better than to make. "I haven't seen anyone like that," she said. Something shifted behind his eyes, not anger. Recognition. The way you recognize a lie the instant it leaves someone's mouth, and choose, for reasons you don't explain, not to call it one. He studied her for 3 full seconds. Long enough that Amara felt sweat gather at the back of her neck, despite the clinic's air conditioning. Long enough that she started counting her own heartbeat just to have something to focus on besides his stare. Then he turned to his men. "We're leaving." They filed out without question. No one argued with him. No one even looked like they considered it. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scar through his eyebrow, glanced back at Amara for half a second before following the others out into the rain. At the door, Tae-jun stopped. He didn't turn around completely, just enough that Amara could see the edge of his face in profile, the rain already starting to darken his shoulders. "Next time you lie to me," he said, "make it convincing." Then he was gone, and the rain swallowed the sound of the SUV doors closing. Amara stood frozen at the desk for a long moment before she remembered to breathe. Behind her, she heard the faint click of the supply closet door easing open an inch, Hyejin's eyes wide and disbelieving in the gap. "He's gone," Amara said, though her voice didn't sound entirely convinced of that yet. Hyejin didn't move from the closet for another full minute. When she finally stepped out, she wouldn't meet Amara's eyes. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "You looked like you were about to die on my floor. What was I supposed to do? You don't understand who that was." "Then tell me." But Hyejin only shook her head, gathered her soaked coat around her shoulders, and slipped out through the clinic's side entrance before Amara could stop her, leaving nothing behind but a damp footprint on the tile and a question Amara wouldn't get an answer to for weeks. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know that within the hour, he'd already have someone pulling together everything there was to know about her: her visa status, her apartment address, the clinic's staff schedule, the name of the delivery driver who brought her the same order of japchae twice a week. She only knew one thing for certain, standing there with her pulse still hammering. Whoever that man was, she had just lied to his face, and somehow he had let her. 3 days after the incident at the clinic, Amara started noticing the car. It was a dark sedan, parked at an angle across from her apartment building, always empty when she looked twice. She told herself it belonged to a neighbor. She told herself that twice more before she stopped believing it. Then the messages started. No name attached, no number saved, just short lines appearing on her phone at odd hours, always after midnight. "You should have minded your own business. She isn't safe." "Neither are you." Amara didn't sleep well after that. She started taking different routes to work, checking the peephole twice before opening her door, keeping her phone charged at all times in case she needed to call someone. Her best friend Daniel noticed before she said a word about it. "Been jumpy for a week," he said, dropping 2 coffees on her kitchen counter without asking whether she wanted one. Daniel had a habit of showing up uninvited whenever his instincts told him something was wrong, and his instincts were rarely wrong. "You gonna tell me why, or am I guessing?" "It's nothing, Amara. It's really nothing, Daniel." He gave her a long look, the kind he'd been giving her since college, the one that said, "I know you, and you're lying badly," but he let it go, because pushing never worked with her anyway. She told herself she was being paranoid. Paranoid people didn't usually turn out to be right. She was wrong about that too. It happened on a Thursday, walking home from the subway station. A man grabbed her arm from behind, dragging her toward the mouth of an alley before she'd even processed what was happening. She screamed. She fought nails, elbows, whatever she had, but he was easily twice her size, and her voice disappeared into the noise of the street. Swallowed by passing traffic and a city that didn't stop for one woman's fear, then there were more footsteps. Fast ones. 2 men in dark suits appeared out of nowhere, and within seconds, the man holding her was on the ground, and she was standing alone, shaking, her bag still clutched against her chest like it was the only solid thing left in the world. A car door opened behind her. She turned, and there he was again. Kang Tae-jun, stepping out into the streetlight like he'd been waiting somewhere just out of sight the entire time. "Why are you following me?" she demanded, her voice cracking despite her best effort to sound steady. "Not the one following you," he said. "The people who want you dead." The words landed harder than the alley had. Amara's knees felt unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with the man who'd grabbed her. "Why," she said slowly, "would anyone want me dead? Because of what you did 3 nights ago." His voice was flat, but his eyes weren't. "You helped a woman disappear. The people looking for her don't believe you did that for free. I don't even know her. They don't know that." He offered her a ride home. She refused, arms crossed, rain starting to needle down around them both. He offered protection, men stationed outside her building, a driver on call, someone watching her at all times. She refused that too. "Not going to be your prisoner," she told him, standing in the rain outside her building, refusing to shiver even though she was freezing. "Whatever this is, whatever you think you owe me for keeping my mouth shut, I don't want it." Something flickered across Tae-jun's face. Amara couldn't name it yet, but it looked almost like respect. "I'm not offering you a cage," he said. "I'm offering you a choice most people don't get. You can say no. Then I'm saying no." He didn't argue. He simply nodded once, turned, and walked back to the SUV, leaving her standing alone under the streetlight with her heart still racing and no explanation for why part of her had wanted him to stay a little longer. He left without pushing further. That surprised her more than anything else that night. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't learn for weeks, was that he kept his word about the choice, but not about leaving her unwatched. Discreet men remained near her building every night after that. A driver she never called happened to be parked outside the clinic on nights she worked late, just far enough away that she never noticed him. Tae-jun had given her freedom. He simply hadn't told her that freedom came with an invisible net underneath it. She found out about the net 2 weeks later, late on a night she couldn't sleep. Walking to clear her head, she passed the private garden behind Tae-jun's estate, the one place she'd been quietly permitted to walk when meeting with his staff about Hae-jin's situation, which had somehow, without her fully agreeing to it, become a recurring appointment, and found him sitting alone on a stone bench, a photograph in his hands. He didn't hear her approach. For the first time since she'd met him, his shoulders weren't perfectly straight. His face wasn't unreadable. For just a moment, like a man carrying something too heavy to set down. "Who is that?" Amara asked quietly. He didn't jump. He didn't hide the photograph either, just looked up at her, something unguarded still sitting behind his eyes before he could put the armor back on. "My sister," he said. "Soo-ah, you don't talk about her. There is not much left to trust in this world," he said. "She's one of the only people I do. What happened to the rest of it? The trust, I mean." He was quiet long enough that Amara almost apologized for asking. Then, people decide who they want to be once money and power are in front of them. Most people decide badly. That's a very lonely way to see the world. It's an accurate one. Those aren't always the same thing. He looked at her then, really looked, in a way that made her suddenly aware of how close she was standing. "You say that like you believe it. I have to. Otherwise, every stranger who walks into my clinic terrified is just proof the world is exactly as bad as it looks." It wasn't much. A handful of words, traded back and forth in a quiet garden neither of them had meant to end up in together. But it was the first time Amara had seen anything underneath the reputation, and it was the first time she wondered if the man everyone in Seoul feared might actually be lonelier than anyone she'd ever met. If you're enjoying this one, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep making them, so if you haven't yet, now's a good time. Now back to Amara. Amara met Soo-ah properly a week later, in a quiet tea house that felt worlds away from Tae-jun's imposing estate. Soo-ah was warmer than her brother, quicker to smile, quicker to ask questions, carrying herself with the same intelligence but none of the coldness. "The one who hid Hae-jin," Soo-ah said, watching Amara over her teacup. "Wasn't a question. Do you know that? Because Hae-jin told me before she disappeared again." Soo-ah's smile faded. "She found something, financial records. Someone inside my brother's organization has been selling information to people who want to see him destroyed." Amara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And you think I'm involved because you're the reason Hae-jin is still alive to know what she knows," Soo-ah said, "which makes you a loose end to whoever's covering this up." The word landed heavier than Amara expected. "Loose end, not a person, a liability. Does your brother know you're telling me this?" "My brother thinks I don't notice how carefully he started watching you," Soo-ah said, a small knowing smile breaking through despite everything. "I notice everything, Amara. It's sort of my whole personality." The first time, Amara understood exactly why she'd become a target, and exactly how much bigger this was than one frightened woman and one dangerous man. "Do you think it is?" Amara asked. "Inside the organization?" Soo-ah's expression sobered completely. "I don't know yet. That's what scares me. Whoever it is, they've been careful enough that my brother trusts them completely." Tae-jun decided that night that keeping Amara in the dark had become more dangerous than bringing her in. He took her into parts of his world she hadn't seen, private security rooms lined with monitors, hushed meetings where grown men lowered their eyes when he entered, a version of Seoul that operated entirely outside anything she'd known existed. Guards nodded at doors that had no visible locks. Ledgers sat open on desks that Amara understood without being told. She wasn't meant to read too closely. She wasn't impressed. If anything, watching him move through that world made something in her chest tighten with unease. "Does it ever bother you?" she asked him one night, after watching him end a meeting with nothing but a look, no raised voice, no threat spoken aloud, just a silence that made 3 grown men shift uncomfortably in their seats until he dismissed them. "All of this. I never asked you to understand my world," he said. "Then don't ask me to stay in it," she shot back. He didn't have an answer for that. For a long moment he just looked at her, really looked, the way people rarely looked at each other anymore, and something passed between them that neither one said out loud. "You could have left after that first night at the clinic," he said finally. "Most people would have." "Not most people," he said. "You're not." It became a pattern after that. Small things. He remembered without asking twice that she took her coffee black with too much sugar. He waited outside the clinic on nights she worked late, never announcing himself, just present when she needed a ride. He fixed problems for her quietly, a landlord dispute resolved overnight, a work visa complication that vanished without explanation, and never once mentioned that he'd done it. Amara noticed. She didn't say anything about it either, but she started leaving her phone unlocked on the nights he texted, just in case. Daniel noticed the change before she was ready to admit it out loud. "Smiling at your phone again," he said one evening, arms crossed, deeply unimpressed. "That man runs half the underground economy in Seoul. Amara hasn't done anything to me, that you know of, Daniel. Just saying, men like that don't fall for women like you because they're bored. They fall for women like you because you're the only person left who tells them the truth. That's not romantic. That's a warning label." Amara didn't have a response for that, not one she was ready to say out loud, so she let the silence answer for her instead. The first real crack in the mystery came from Amara herself. She'd been helping Soo-ah cross-reference financial records, nothing dramatic, just careful. Patient work, the kind Amara was good at from years of translating documents that needed precision. It was in that patient work that she found it, a pattern of file access that didn't match any authorized name, timestamps clustered late at night, always routed through a login that had been quietly decommissioned 2 years earlier and somehow was still active. Someone had been quietly pulling Soo-ah's private files. Repeatedly. Recently, Amara brought it straight to Tae-jun. He studied the pages for a long time before speaking. "This isn't possible. The access logs would have to go through someone with clearance," Amara finished. "Someone you trust." His jaw tightened. For the first time since she'd known him, Amara watched Kang Tae-jun look genuinely shaken. "I need to verify this," he said finally. "Tae-jun," she waited until he looked at her. "Whoever this is, they're close to you, close enough to know exactly how to hide." "I know, that scares you." "It should scare you more," he said quietly. "You're the one they're already trying to remove." What neither of them knew yet, what wouldn't surface for weeks, was that the trail had been deliberately smudged. Someone had gone to great lengths to make an innocent man look guilty, burying their own tracks under someone else's name. Kang Tae-hyun, Tae-jun's own uncle, had been quietly flagged in the initial trace, a fact that sat uneasily with both of them for days, given his sudden interest in Tae-jun's dealings with Amara. The real traitor was still watching, still waiting, still 3 steps ahead of them both. They were driving back from Soo-ah's apartment late one night, the city lights blurring past the windows, when Tae-jun finally said what neither of them had said out loud yet. "First person I've wanted to protect without knowing how to control the outcome," he said, not looking at her, his hands steady on the wheel even as his voice wasn't. Amara turned to look at him. "That sounds like it terrifies you." "It does." "Why?" "Because everyone I've ever tried to control the outcome for is either dead or working against me." He finally glanced at her, and something in his expression had cracked entirely open. "I don't know what to do with someone I can't protect that way." "Maybe you're not supposed to protect me that way," Amara said quietly. "Maybe you're just supposed to trust that I can handle knowing the truth." Car stopped at a red light that stayed red far longer than either of them noticed. When he finally turned to look at her, there wasn't anything cold in his expression anymore, nothing calculated, nothing guarded. Just a man who had spent years making sure nothing could touch him, discovering that something already had. The kiss, when it happened, wasn't dramatic. No music swelling, no grand declaration. Just 2 people who had spent weeks pretending they didn't feel what they felt, finally admitting they'd lost that particular fight. Neither of them said the word love that night. They didn't need to. Quick pause before we keep going. If Amara's got you hooked, hit subscribe and drop a like, and tell me in the comments whether you think Tae-jun's finally telling her everything. Now, back to the story. The traitor noticed the change before anyone else did. Seok-jin had spent 17 years learning to read Kang Tae-jun's face better than most men read their own reflection, and what he saw now worried him more than anything had in years. Tae-jun had never been vulnerable before. Vulnerable men made mistakes. Vulnerable men trusted people they shouldn't. Vulnerable men could be manipulated. Seok-jin had built his entire position on being the calm one, the one who never raised his voice, never needed credit, never seemed to want anything beyond quiet competence. It had taken years of patience to become the last name anyone suspected. It started small. A photograph, doctored just enough to suggest Tae-jun had known about Hae-jin's disappearance before he ever mentioned it to Amara. A conversation, twisted in the retelling, that made it sound like he'd been managing her rather than protecting her. Seok-jin planted both carefully, through a contact Amara had no reason to distrust, one of Soo-ah's own assistants, unknowingly used as a messenger for lies she believed were true. By the time it reached Amara, it didn't feel like a lie. It felt like confirmation of every quiet doubt she'd been too afraid to speak out loud. "Did you know?" She asked him, standing in his study, her voice tight with something between anger and heartbreak. "Did you know what happened to Hae-jin before you told me?" "Amara, that's not an answer." He hesitated, just for a second, but in that hesitation she saw everything she needed to see. "There are things I couldn't tell you," he said carefully. "Not because I didn't trust you, because telling you would have put you in more danger." "You don't get to decide that for me," she said, her voice shaking now. "I'm not something you protect by controlling what I know. That's exactly what I told you I wasn't going to be." "Amara, that's not what this is." "Then what is it, Tae-jun?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like every other powerful man who decides a woman is safer not knowing the truth." He flinched at that, genuinely flinched, the first time she'd seen him do so since the night she'd met him. "I never lied to you," he said quietly. "You just didn't tell me everything." "I'm not sure that's better." She left before he could find the right words, because the truth was, he didn't have them yet. Not the real ones, not the ones that would have explained everything, because even Tae-jun didn't yet know how deep the deception went. He stood alone in his study long after she'd gone, staring at the door she'd walked through, understanding for the first time just how effectively someone inside his own house had turned the one good thing in his life against him. She was 3 blocks from her apartment when they took her. It happened fast, a van, a hand over her mouth, her bag wrenched off her shoulder before she even registered what was happening. Then darkness, and the smell of motor oil, and her own heartbeat pounding louder than anything else. When Tae-jun received the video, he didn't sit down, he didn't call a meeting. He watched it once in silence, his knuckles whitening around the edge of the table, and then he said 2 words that no one in the room expected: "Burn it." His lieutenant stared at him. Park Min-ho, standing closest, spoke first. "So the operation, burn all of it," Tae-jun said again, quieter now, which was somehow more frightening than if he'd shouted. "Every account, every shipment, every deal we've built for the last 6 years. If that's what they want, they can have it. That's everything you've spent a decade building. Then it's already spent." Tae-jun looked up, and the coldness in his eyes wasn't the same coldness his men were used to. This was something sharper. "Find her. That's the only instruction that matters right now." He meant it, and everyone in that room understood, for the first time, exactly how far this man was willing to fall for one woman who had refused to be afraid of him. What his lieutenants didn't know, what only Tae-jun understood, was that beneath the surrender, he was already moving. Dismantling the empire publicly bought him time. Quietly, he was using the organization's deepest, most hidden channels to trace exactly where that van had gone, calling in favors he'd spent years never asking for. Amara wasn't waiting to be rescued. Tied to a chair in a room she didn't recognize, she forced herself to breathe, to think, to notice, the way she'd learned to notice things as a translator, catching details other people missed even in languages she didn't speak fluently. A phrase one of her captors used twice, a specific turn of speech that felt oddly familiar. A tattoo on one man's wrist she'd seen once before, in passing, at Tae-jun's estate. She recognized it. She'd seen it on a man who worked closely with Han Seok-jin. Her mind moved faster than her fear. Seok-jin was always in the room during Tae-jun's most private meetings. Seok-jin was the one who'd suggested planting extra security near Soo-ah's apartment. Seok-jin had access to everything. It's him, she thought. It was always him. When one of her captors left his phone unattended just long enough, she memorized the number on the screen before he snatched it back. It wasn't much. But it was enough, and when Soo-ah's men finally located her 3 hours later, following the trail of that same number, Amara had already worked out most of the truth on her own. She didn't need saving. She needed someone to open the door. The confrontation with Han Seok-jin happened in the same security room where Amara had first seen the true scale of Tae-jun's world. 17 years, Tae-jun said quietly, staring at the man he'd once trusted more than his own blood relatives. 17 years, and I never saw it. Seok-jin didn't bother denying it anymore. There was almost relief in his voice when he finally spoke. You were never going to give me what I earned. I built half of this organization in the shadows while you took the credit standing in the light. So you decided to burn it down instead. Decided to take what should have already been mine. He'd manipulated Soo-ah's trust for months, feeding her carefully shaped half-truths to lead her toward the wrong suspects, including, deliberately, his own uncle. Knowing family tension would keep Tae-jun distracted. He'd arranged the attacks on Amara, calculating that isolating her would isolate Tae-jun in turn. Every crack of distrust that had spread through the organization over the past year, he'd planted it himself, patiently waiting for the entire structure to collapse under its own suspicion. His goal was never money, it was everything. You could have just asked, Tae-jun said, and for a moment something almost like grief passed across his face. Whatever you wanted, I would have given you a seat at the table. I didn't want a seat, Seok-jin said. I wanted the table. Tae-jun didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. What happened to Han Seok-jin after that conversation was handled the way everything in that world was handled, quietly, permanently, and without an audience. He found Amara in the room where Soo-ah's men had brought her, a blanket around her shoulders, her hands still trembling slightly even though the danger had passed. She looked up when he entered. She didn't run to him. She didn't collapse into relief the way he might have expected weeks ago before he understood who she really was. You ever actually trust me? She asked quietly. Tae-jun didn't have an easy answer. He'd spent his entire adult life deciding alone what other people needed to know and what they didn't, and somewhere along the way, without meaning to, he'd done the same thing to the one person who'd never asked him to protect her from the truth. I trusted you with everything except the truth about how dangerous loving me actually was, he said. That was never about you, that was about what I was too afraid to lose. Amara looked at him for a long moment, the blanket still pulled tight around her shoulders. If you leave, he said, quieter now, I'll let you. It was the first time in his life Kang Tae-jun had offered someone power over him instead of taking it for himself. She did leave. Not out of fear of him, she understood that now clearly, standing in the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened. She left because she needed to know, without his presence clouding the answer, whether she wanted to stay for herself or simply because leaving felt harder. Days passed. Tae-jun didn't call, didn't send anyone to check on her, didn't make a single move to pull her back. Amara spent those days doing something she hadn't done in weeks, sitting with herself, in her own apartment, with her own thoughts, no danger circling the edges of her life for the first time since Hae-jin had walked through the clinic doors. Daniel came by twice, said nothing about Tae-jun either time, and simply sat with her while she figured out what she actually wanted. You don't have to decide today, he told her the second night, handing her a container of food she hadn't asked for but was grateful for anyway. I know, you already have, haven't you? Amara didn't answer right away. I think I have. She realized slowly that she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She never really had been. What she'd been afraid of was disappearing into someone else's world so completely that she stopped recognizing her own reflection. So when she finally returned to his estate, she didn't come as someone who needed rescuing, and she didn't come as someone surrendering. She came with conditions. I'm not going to be part of your organization, she told him, standing in the same garden where she'd first seen him unguarded. I'm keeping my job, my apartment for now, my friends, my name. When people ask who I am, I'm not going to be introduced as anyone's possession. I know, Tae-jun said. I mean it, Tae-jun. I know, he said again, and this time there was something almost like a smile at the corner of his mouth, small, unfamiliar on his face, but real. I don't need you to belong to my world. Good, Amara said, because I never planned to. The final thread completed itself faster than either of them expected. Going through the last of Seok-jin's private files, Amara found something buried in an encrypted folder he'd never gotten the chance to delete, a location. Soo-ah's location, cross-referenced against a list of Seok-jin's remaining contacts, men who hadn't yet learned their patron was dead and were still following his last standing order. Eliminate the Kang bloodline's last loose end. Amara didn't wait for permission. She copied everything onto a drive, grabbed her coat, and was 3 blocks from the safe house before Tae-jun's men even realized she'd left. That's how she ended up running through an underground parking garage with blood on her hands, not her own, but one of Seok-jin's remaining men, who'd tried to stop her from reaching Tae-jun in time and hadn't succeeded, clutching the one piece of evidence that could save Soo-ah's life, before the men hunting her finished what Seok-jin had started. Tae-jun's SUV screeched around the corner exactly when she needed it to. "Who did you kill?" he asked, stepping out, his eyes moving from her face to the blood on her hands. "Nobody," Amara said, breathless, holding up the drive. "But they're going to kill your sister right now unless we move." This time there was no mystery behind his eyes, only urgency. "Where?" he said, already reaching for his phone. She told him. And for the first time since this had all started, Amara wasn't the one being protected. She was the one who'd found the answer in time to save someone else's life. Soo-ah made it out untouched, 20 minutes later, because Amara had refused to wait for someone else to notice what she'd already seen. He opened his arms, and this time, Amara was the one who closed the distance between them, choosing him the same way she'd chosen everything else in this story, on her own terms. She understood exactly how she'd gotten there, not as a woman who'd been rescued. As a woman who had chosen, at every single turn, to fight for the truth instead of running from it, and who had chosen, in the end, to love a dangerous man without losing a single piece of herself in the process. A woman doesn't become valuable because a powerful man chooses her. She was valuable before he ever saw her. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe for more Afro-Korean romance, drop a like, and tell me in the comments, did Amara make the right choice by going back?